We are glad that you're here, and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers who are present, and for those who have to contact their mothers from afar, and as well as for those of us who have fond memory of our mothers. We want to welcome and thank Dr. Harold Shank and his wife Sally for coming our way. Darlene informs me that the women had a wonderful time at the tea yesterday. Harold Shank is the president of Ohio Valley University. He is a national spokesperson for the Christian Child and Family Services as well as vulnerable children. He's been a professor and a minister for many, many years. His education, he has a BA from Oklahoma Christian University, an MA and an MA in religion from Harding School of Theology, a PhD in theology from Marquette University. He has authored 8 books, and I understand that he is working on a 9th. He is the father of 2 sons, Daniel and Nathan. He is a member of the Camden Avenue Church of Christ, and as I stated, he is the husband of Sally Shank. Most of all, he is a servant of our Lord, and he is a gospel preacher. He loves God, he loves the Word, and he has a strong compassion for those who have obeyed the gospel and for those who have yet to obey our Lord. So I would invite you this morning to become an active listener as he speaks to us. He will speak at the Bible class, which is at 9, and then he will also speak at our worship service, which will begin at 10. We will have a sing. We'll have a meal at 11:30, fellowship dinner, and then we will have a 1 o'clock sing, and then he will finish up at 1:30. So if you will go ahead and join in, I'd like to ask President Shank to come up and speak.
Well, good morning. We're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, so if you have a Bible on your phone or if you still carry a paper Bible, open to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Well, it's a joy to be with you, and Sally and I always enjoy coming to Marietta and 6th and Washington. I think we decided it was the 5th time we'd been in Marietta this week. And so it's a beautiful time of year, and we are going to enjoy this day with you, and glad to be here. Glad to be with Roger and Diane, and Harry and Darlene, know them well and appreciate them very much. And so happy Mother's Day to all of you mothers. I know that can be a time of joy, but it also can be a time of sadness, can it? Because some didn't have good experiences with their mothers, and some have lost mothers under unfortunate circumstances. My mother is at Worthington Manor. She's had Alzheimer's disease since 1999 and hasn't known me for 5 or 6, 7 years, and so it's awkward. We'll go by this afternoon, but she won't know who we are. But have fond memories of my mother. One of our sons already texted Sally, said that yesterday at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he took a nap. Sally takes a nap every day at 2. And he said, I took a nap and woke up and I was ready to go. And he said, I'm becoming more like my mother. And so that was yesterday. Well, at this hour, we're going to talk about 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and how it responds to 3 core questions that I think we all ask. And I thought this might be appropriate for us to think about, whether we're members of this congregation or whether you're visiting like we are today, whether you're friends and family. I thought that would be a good topic to take up. And then at the worship hour, we'll look at Deuteronomy chapter 6 and raise some questions about young people and passing on the faith to the next generation. How do we go about doing that? And how are we faring in that task in America and churches of Christ today? So that'll be the next hour, Deuteronomy chapter 6. And then after we eat, in order to try to keep you awake in the afternoon, we'll look at Colossians chapter 1. And it seems to me that the book of Colossians, one of the most remarkable books in the Bible in many ways, short. It's the sort of book you can get your head around really quickly, but it's a book that really is a book for our time. And as we think about all the competing voices that we hear, all the people out there claiming to have authority, claiming to have a better way to live life, why should we hold to Jesus Christ? And it's a book that addresses that issue, so I think it's very much a book for our day and for our time. And so that'll be, I think, 1:30 or 2 o'clock, something this afternoon. So 1 Corinthians 1, and then Deuteronomy 6, and then we'll go to Colossians 1 early in the afternoon. I know this church, and if you're a guest today, you may wonder, why are they pulling out all these old Bible texts? But that's what this church does. We in Churches of Christ are trying to go back to the Bible and to be biblically oriented people, to speak where the Bible speaks and to be silent where the Bible is silent, and to do things in Bible ways. And so that's why those of us who teach and speak choose these texts and then talk about these texts together. If you're not familiar with the Bible, allow me just a moment to give you a brief introduction. The Bible's a long book. It's an old book. It has two parts to it, the Old Testament and then the New Testament. And at the worship hour, we'll be looking at Deuteronomy 6, which is the fifth of the 66 books in the Bible, fifth book in the Old Testament. We're going to be looking at 1 Corinthians. It's in the New Testament. We'll be looking at Colossians 1. That's also in the New Testament. The New Testament opens with 4 volumes. We call them books. They're actually parts of the larger book we call the Bible. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And those are all parallel stories in many ways, each with a different focus, about the life of Jesus Christ. And this is a church of Christ, which means we are followers of the one that's described there. And then out of the life of Jesus comes a group of followers, a community, comes to be known as the church. And the fifth book in the New Testament takes up that story, the story of the church, the early church in the first century, about 2,000 years ago. And then after that are a long group of what we call epistles or letters. And many of these are written by one of the early Christian leaders, Paul. And he writes the book we're going to look at now, the book of 1 Corinthians. And he writes actually 13 or 14 of those epistles. And then the New Testament ends with the book of Revelation, which was addressed to people who were being persecuted for believing in Jesus, written in code, a very exciting, vivid language, a little bit like some of the movies we see today with all sorts of amazing things going on. And with that, the Bible comes to an end. And so we'll be in 1 Corinthians. Paul actually visited the church in Corinth, helped start it. Corinth is not there anymore. It was in Greece, just west of Athens, over on the peninsula. There's a little isthmus that connects it with the mainland. There's a canal there. It was a city that had a big acropolis, and then a lower area where the market was and where the people lived. A major area in the ancient world, maybe a bit like Columbus or Pittsburgh would be to us. But today it's just an archaeological site, and very few people actually live there. And so Paul wrote to that church. He actually writes 2 books, and we'll be in the first book. So if you're new to this Bible study business, I thought that might be a little bit helpful to you. So let's think about this text. I want to begin by talking about 3 basic questions that, whether you're a church member and have been so all of your life, or whether you've come today at the invitation of some family or friends, I think 3 questions that we all ask. And the answers sometimes trouble us at various points in life. And I want to suggest that the answers to those questions are here in 1 Corinthians 1. The first question is, how do I deal with my mistakes? How do I deal with my failures? How do I deal with the things I do wrong? And we all do things wrong. You may have entered some things on your IRS form incorrectly, or maybe you cheated on your IRS form. Or maybe you've run a stop sign on the way to church this morning, or a red light. Or maybe you've been in an automobile accident that you caused. Maybe you were drunk and you caused an accident. Maybe you forgot an appointment. But along the way, all of us have made some mistakes, and they trouble us. I have a younger sister named Vicki. She lives up near Pittsburgh, where I grew up, and she was down in Pittsburgh one day working for her bank, and on her way home, there was a man, vice president of one of the major corporations in Pittsburgh, He was at the Elks Club getting some alcohol. He had too much, got in his car, was driving toward on the street where my sister was coming the other way. Hit one car, bounced off, hit another car, bounced off, hit another car, bounced off, and hit my sister head on. He was drunk, and both of her legs were driven into the floorboard of her car. Her right heel was fractured into 150 pieces, her left heel into 125 pieces, and she lost her left leg. Well, that man never apologized to my sister. He never admitted that he was wrong. He got drunk, hit 4 cars, caused a woman to lose her leg. Well, how do you deal with that kind of failure? How do you live with that? My sense is, from what I know about that man, is he just numbed it with alcohol until he died of a heart attack. He never faced it. Or I have a friend named John. John and I went to college together, grew up together, went to camp together in Pennsylvania. Both became preachers. And just about a week or two after I became president, back in 2011, John was arrested in Somerset, Pennsylvania, and charged with 82 counts of pedophilia, abusing children. He's now serving 3 life sentences in a penitentiary up near State College. I've talked with him several times. I keep up with him. I'm still interested in saving his soul, but how do you deal with that kind of failure? So how do we deal with our failures? What are the answers to those questions? Well, that's number one. The second question that I think we all ask is, how do I deal with my futility? Why am I here? What's my purpose in life? What makes us get up every day? What reason do I have for going on? What's my purpose? And so how do we deal with futility? Jean-Henri Fabre was a French naturalist, scientist, died in 1915. And he tells a story about being out in the woods one day, and he came across a colony of processional caterpillars. The caterpillars that go through the woods all in a line, front to back, front to back, front to back. They just follow their leader everywhere through the woods. And he was fascinated by these processional caterpillars just making their way through the woods. And so he thought, I think I'll do an experiment. So he collected a sample of them, took them back to his lab, these little caterpillars, and he had a large vase there, maybe 2 foot in diameter at the rim. And he put these caterpillars, lined them up head to tail, head to tail, head to tail, around the rim of that vase. And they started their procession, each one following the one in front of them. And so it was an unbroken circle. You watched them all day. They just kept marching around the rim of that vase. There was some food nearby. They never stopped, marched into the night, and one by one, they fell off the vase, dying of starvation on their journey to nowhere. Well, we're not caterpillars, but sometimes life feels a little bit like you're walking around the rim of a vase, following the caterpillar of the person in front of you on a merry journey to nowhere. What is life about? Why are we here? You may have read Jack Higgins' novel, The Eagle Has Landed, and in it, the main character has the high point of his career. He's become very successful, and he says in the book, there's one thing I wish I had known when I was a young boy, and that is when you get to the top, there's nothing there. What is life about? You remember Lee Iacocca took over the Chrysler Corporation a number of years ago, wrote a book called Straight Talk. I suspect some of you have read that. And in the book, here's a quote from the book. He says, "Here I am in the twilight years of my life, still wondering what it's all about. And I can tell you this, fame and fortune is for the birds." Lee Iacocca. Sally and I were influenced by a preacher named Stanley Shipp years ago. I heard him speak once, and he was talking about his tombstone. What did he want to have on his tombstone? What line there? And he said, I don't care what they put on it. He said, there's one thing I don't want it to say. Here lies Stanley Shipp, lived 90 years, nobody knows why. So how do I deal with the futility? How do I deal with my failures? How do I deal with my futility? And then the third question I think that we all share in common, whether we're a professor at the university here, or the college here, or a homeless man down on Front Street, or whether you remember this congregation, you live out in the country. The third one is, how do I deal with my finality? Because we all die. We have to face that. My mother's over at Worthington Manor there in Parkersburg, and this year so far, 2 of her roommates have died. We came in and she's no longer there. Came in again, roommate's no longer there. I remember when I was in 12th grade up near Pittsburgh, we had an awards assembly in high school. It was in the gymnasium, wasn't air conditioned, it was hot. And there was this elderly man that was there to present an award. He was at the microphone underneath the basket, went into the basketball court, and he was getting ready to explain the award that he was going to present to some high school senior. And he said, I don't feel very well. And he just collapsed right in front of the whole student body and died. First man I saw die. Or Lige Turman was a good friend of mine in Memphis, was a professor of physical education at the local university, taught both of our sons to swim. One summer at our church camp, he got sick, and he was an elder in our church. And he came back, they found out he had leukemia, 50 years old, 55. And I remember being in the hospital at Lige's bedside 3 months later when he died. So we all die. So how do you deal with that? How do you face that? So three critical questions of life. How do I deal with my failures? How do I deal with futility? And how do I deal with finality? Well, I'd like to read a little section out of 1 Corinthians 1. It took a little while to get there, but I wanted to set this up properly. This text doesn't use the words failure, finality, or futility. It talks about being saved and being perishing, but I think there are answers to all 3 questions in this text. So follow along as I read this. I'm going to start in verse 18, Paul writing to the church in Corinth that he helped start. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the cleverness of the clever I will thwart. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs, Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews, folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your call, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. He is the source of your life in Christ Jesus, whom God made our wisdom, our righteousness, our sanctification, and redemption. Therefore, as it is written, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. Well, that's a dense reading, and we can't unpack all of that this morning. But the statement starts with all this contradiction, because ultimately this paragraph is about the cross. And the cross, if you're not familiar with the story, is about the cross of Jesus Christ, lived in the first century, known as an excellent teacher, but his life ended by being nailed to a Roman cross just outside the walls of Jerusalem. And when you measure various things by cultural standards, it's hard to get lower than the cross. For centuries before the cross, and for centuries after the cross, crucifixion was the most horrible of capital punishments. It's better to die by hanging, by the sword, by drowning, than to die of crucifixion. Crucifixion is so bad that there's not a single nation on the earth today that will crucify people because it's so lowly. It's such a miserable way to kill a person. And so everything about the cross of Jesus suggests that he was a loser. The authorities turned against him. His friends deserted him. The people that he had fed during his life fled at the cross. People he sought to help condemned him to death. And if you were keeping score, if this were a game, it would be the world 10, Jesus nothing. Shut up. But Paul says that the way to win at life, and ultimately I think the answer to our three questions, is at the cross. People expect God to work with power, but he works through weakness. People expect God to give us logic. He gives us foolishness. And God doesn't work the way we expect him to work. And so the answers are paradoxical. They're not what we expect. The cross upsets our normal paradigms. The cross tells us about a unique and new way of knowing God. The cross is a symbol of God's paradoxical character. The cross upsets everything we think we have figured out. And so the cross is a surprise. The Jews expected a miracle. They expected power, another rainbow in the sky, another parting of the Red Sea. But what they got was Jesus dying on the cross. And the Greeks, the intellects of the day, they were surprised by the cross. They expected a syllogism. They expected philosophy. They expected logic, another Plato, another Socrates. And what they got was Jesus dying on the cross. So how does Jesus dying on the cross, this foolishness, how does that answer our three questions? Let's look. Well, the cross tells us, number one, that we can't overcome our own failures. But the cross gives us a way to overcome our mistakes and our failures. And that's really the central point of this text. It was written to the church of Corinth. The problem in that church was they were divided. They had gathered around different leaders. They were following people who talked about human wisdom. They were swayed by people who spoke with great eloquence. But the writer reminds them of this huge inconsistency. Before we turn to Christ, we think we can figure out life on our own. After we turn to Christ, we think we can figure out life on our own. The reality is we cannot figure out life on our own. We can't. You remember John Godfrey Sacks, 19th century American poet. He's the one who wrote the poem called The Blind Men and the Elephant. Remember that story? 6 blind men. They all go up to an elephant to try to describe it, and one blind man feels the trunk of the elephant. He said, the elephant's like a snake. And the other one feels the tusk of the elephant. He says, no, the elephant's like a sword. Another one feels the elephant's ear, says, no, the elephant is like a leaf on a tree. Another blind man feels the elephant's side. He said, no, the elephant is like a wall. The other one feels his leg, and he said, no, the elephant is like a tree. Another one grabs the little tail of the elephant. He says, no, the elephant's like a rope. And then the poem ends, and so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceedingly stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right and all were in the wrong. So often in theological wars, the disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about the elephant that not one of them has seen. Well, I think he captures the point of 1 Corinthians 1 is that we can't figure it out. Verse 21 again, for since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God, God was pleased through the foolishness of this message preached, the cross, to save those who believe. So we can't figure out how to overcome our own failures. People might say they can, but they can't. And so it doesn't matter how much you practice, it doesn't work out. It doesn't matter how many books you read, doesn't matter how long you go to school, doesn't matter all the ways you figured out to win at life. You never find a solution to this problem. The only way to win is at the cross. The only way to win is the cross is a gift. that does something for us that we couldn't do on our own. It's given to the poor and to the rich, to the winners and to the losers, to the good and to the bad, to the intellects and to the slow. The cross is available to the one who hurts and the one who does the hurting. It's a gift to all. And so the cross tells us that we can be forgiven of what we've done wrong. If we fall down before the cross, God picks us up and takes us across the finish line. We owed a debt we could not pay. He paid a debt he did not owe. We made mistakes we could never correct. God made all things right. We were caught up in our failures. And by the cross, God lifts us to success. So by the cross, we have forgiveness of our failures. God takes them away because Jesus paid the price for us at the cross. So how do we deal with our failures? We go to the cross. That's the message of Christianity. Well, what about futility? We have this sense of purposelessness in life, this sense of what is life about? Why should I go on? Why get up in the morning? Life is confusing but we don't have to sort it out by ourselves. We don't have to read all the world's great philosophies. We don't have to memorize every line in Consumer Reports. Don't have to check out every website. Don't have to get all the most recent data. All we have to do to figure out life is see life through the lens of the cross. Because the word of the cross is a paradox. To losers, it seems to be utter folly. To winners, it seems it opens up the power of God himself. And so I call your attention to another verse here, again in verse 23. But we preach Christ crucified, to the Jews a stumbling block, and to Gentiles foolishness. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. And so once we go to the cross, we're given a purpose in life. And our purpose is to follow Jesus. So 22 times in those first 4 books of the New Testament, it says follow Jesus. And so we're to walk where he walked and to do what he did. We're to be the body of Christ as he was the head. Paul will use that imagery. And so my head tells my body what to do. And my head gives my body meaning. And so Jesus is the head, and we are the body, and he gives us meaning. The sign out on the building is quite large. It says Church of Christ. It implies that the people who meet here are the church, and they follow the Christ. And what he says they do, and he gives them purpose, and he gives them meaning. And so Jesus said, you deny yourself, take up your cross, and you follow me. And that's where we find meaning. That's where we find purpose. Not in pursuing our own agenda, not climbing the top of our own mountain, not reaching the height of our own profession, but in humility, denying ourselves, taking up our cross, and following him. So he ends the futility. He ends the sense of purposelessness by giving us a way to go on. And then we join Jesus as he came to fix the broken world. In Luke chapter 4, verse 18, he said, I've been anointed by the Spirit to preach good news to the poor and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at release those who are captive. He came to fix the broken world, and he invites us to join him in ministering to the world. And so we get texts like James chapter 1, verse 27, pure religion undefiled before God the Father is this: visit the widows and the orphans. Visit the widows and the orphans, and you find purpose because you're following Jesus. Or there in that great scene in Matthew 25, which is one of the few times we really get a picture of what the judgment day will be like, what happens when this life is over. People come to Jesus, and they're evaluated by Jesus. And Jesus says, well, I'm afraid that I don't know you. And they say, well, how is it that we don't know you? We went to church all the time. He said, but I was sick, and I was hungry and thirsty, and you didn't help me at all. And I was in prison, and I was in the hospital, and you didn't come to see me. And I was naked, and you didn't offer me any clothes. And they said, well, when did we not do that to you, Jesus? When you didn't do it to the people around you, you didn't do it to me. Well, when we serve the poor, when we serve the sick, when we minister to those who are down and out, we're serving Jesus, but we're also finding purpose and meaning in life. And so it brings all of life together. So the cross answers the question about our failure. We owed a debt we could not pay. He paid a debt he did not owe. And so he paid the price for our failures. It gives us an answer to futility. We don't know why we're here. We're not sure about our purpose. He gives us a purpose to do what he wants us to do, to follow him, to fix the broken world. And then number 3, 1 Corinthians 1 answers this question about our finality. We all die. We all attend funerals. We all face that day with, whether by tragedy or in our bed, we breathe our last. Well, 1 Corinthians 1 doesn't deal with what happens after death, but he opens the book with a story about the cross. He ends the book with the great implication of the cross and the story of the resurrection. So Jesus died, he was buried in a tomb, and he was raised from the dead. And he says that those who follow him have that same experience. And so, reading chapter 15, if you flip over there, move over there on your electronic device, I'm reading verse 51 of this great chapter about resurrection. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For this perishable must put on the imperishable, and this mortal must put on immortality. But when this perishable will have put on the imperishable, and this mortal will have put on immortality, then will come about the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? Quoting Hosea chapter 13. The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, all of us here, every single one of us here, know numerous people who have died. But not a single one of us here know anybody who's died, been buried, and then come back. But Jesus did just that. He died, he was buried, and he came back. And he said, and we'll talk about this after lunch, he's the firstborn of the resurrection, the firstborn from the dead. And so he gives us the opportunity after death to be raised with him, to walk in a new life. Well, those are the 3 questions that I think all people ask. How do I deal with my mistakes, my failures? I've bungled life, and some of those things we can fix, but a lot of them we can't fix. And so the man who caused my sister all that pain and agony, the man who's in prison up in Pennsylvania, how do you fix that? Well, there's only one way to fix these problems. It's at the cross. It's by coming to the cross, and then Jesus pays the debt he did not owe because we owed a debt we could not pay. And then how do we deal with our futility of, why do I get up? Why am I here? What's my purpose? Well, the cross gives us the way. We deny ourselves. We take up his cross, orphans, widows, the poor, the broken, the people around us who need our help. We become workers with Jesus in fixing the broken world, and it gives us meaning and significance. And then we all face our own death, and how do we face that death? What happens beyond? Well, we know what happens beyond. For those who've been to the cross, after death, there's a resurrection. We will be changed, but we will be raised, and we will live with Jesus forever. Well, one of my favorite stories, and I'll close with this, dates back to the 1950s. It's a true story. Tony Orlando wrote a song about it in 1973. He called it Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree. And then, I don't know if you remember, but back during the Iran crisis, when we had those hostages in Iran, the song and the story was widely told again. Well, it's about 3 boys, teenagers from New York City, and one of the boys later told this story to Pete Hamill. Hamill was a columnist for the New York Times, and he published the story in the Times in 1971. The story took place in 1950. The boys, teenagers, decided to leave New York City in spring break and go down to Florida and enjoy the sun during the coldness of spring. And as the bus was going down the East Coast, remember it's 1950, before the expressways, they noticed there was an elderly man sitting in the back of the bus. And when they stopped for the rest breaks at the little towns along the way, he didn't get off. He never talked to anybody. And so they stopped apparently at a diner or something, and one of the three boys asked the elderly man, "Would you join us?" And he did. So they got to talking, and the boy said, we're going to Florida, get some sun, have a good time. Have you ever been to Florida? The old man said, yes. Used to live right on the border. Been to Florida many times. Well, do you still have a home there? Do you still have a family there? And the old man said, well, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? And the teenagers quizzed him, and well, the boys seemed friendly, and so the old man, impressed by their friendliness, opened up and he told them his story. When I was young, I had a beautiful wife, several children, and I committed a crime. I was arrested. The trial went against me, and I was convicted and sent to a federal penitentiary in New York. And I've spent most of my life in that penitentiary. And right after the trial, right after I got to New York, I wrote to my wife down in Brunswick, Georgia. And I said, don't write me. Don't tell the children about their father. Don't tell them that I'm in prison. I don't want them growing up knowing their father is a convict. Don't come to see me. Don't respond to this letter. And he told the boys, all these years, I've not heard from her. And I don't know what's going on. But about a week ago, I learned that I was going to be paroled, being out of prison. And so I had an old address in Brunswick, Georgia. So I wrote to my wife, said, I'm going to be on a bus coming through town, and I won't get off unless I see a sign from you, and just take a yellow handkerchief. And down at the little square in the middle of town, Brunswick, Georgia, just tie that handkerchief in that oak tree right in the middle. And if I see the handkerchief, then I'll know that you want me back, and I'll get off the bus. But if I don't see the handkerchief, I'll just go on. And so as they approached Georgia, the story spread throughout the bus. Pretty soon everybody knew the story, knew about the old man in the back, and so they entered Brunswick, and the bus was going down one street and turned down to another street, and all the noses were pressed up against the window. And they finally came right into the city square. And there was that oak tree. And there wasn't a single yellow handkerchief on it. There were hundreds of yellow handkerchiefs all over the tree. And the man knew that he had come home. Well, we live life wondering how it's going to end. We've done things wrong. We've failed. I think this is the end. And we send out our plea to God, and we ride the bus toward him. As we turn the corner, right there in the middle of the square, is the old rugged cross. And it tells us that in Christ, we're a new creation. And the old has passed away, and all things are new. And we get to live forever. 1 Corinthians chapter 1.